coincidental. The trial could resume soon. Frank Langford, NPR News.
Stocks are trading higher on Wall Street at this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 592 points. Good time. 400 also trading higher, up 84. The Nasdaq up 354 points. This is NPR News.
Live from Philadelphia, this is WHY News. I'm Priyanka Tiwari. Philadelphia officials are slated to give an update this hour on plans for 100 people who have been living in tents along Ben Franklin Parkway for months. The members of that encampment and another by the Philadelphia Housing Authority's Ridge Avenue headquarters were given a 9 a.m. deadline to leave. But despite the presence of police and sanitation trucks, the deadline came and went with no action. Mike Wilson is one of the many activists standing in solidarity with the people living in the camp. He says the group will continue to demand affordable housing no matter what the city announces today.
We are going to continue to press the issue early as tomorrow. We have no problem taking more houses. We have no problem taking more gas.
The city has offered its culture their mail-in ballot. The state is also rolling out a new online voter registration system. Murphy said nearly 13,000 people registered to vote during the first week of online voter registration. Your WHYY forecast, 78 degrees and overcast in Philadelphia at 106. Isolated showers this afternoon. Today's highs near 83. You're listening to 9.9 WHYY.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Raymond James, a firm focused on transforming lives, businesses, and communities through tailored wealth management, banking, and capital markets solutions. Learn more at raymondjames.com. And Americans for the Arts.
From NPR and WBUR, I'm Jeremy Thompson.
I'm Robin Young. It's here and now. Let's start the hour with the news that the drug maker AstraZeneca, which is in partnership with the University of Oxford in England, has put its COVID-19 vaccine, one of 9 potential vaccines in phase 3 trial, on pause after discovering that a trial participant in the report had serious adverse reactions. Adam Flores is
are being very closely followed. And they probably will be one PCR, but I think the rest of it what that means, and it's not entirely clear, but based on our reporting, what it means is that particularly the U.S.-based clinical trial, and that's the trial that AstraZeneca just recently started at the end of August, that patients who have been enrolled in that study or scheduled to receive their first vaccination have basically been put on hold. They've been told to, call later, we will reschedule your appointment. So at this point, no one is getting vaccinations until they determine, the cause. The patient who experienced this adverse event was in the UK, so presumably was in the UK-based study, and that's a study that's further along than the one that was in the US, which just only just started.
And we know it was going well in the UK because the Lancet reported in July that there have been no adverse effects there. But now that there is this pause, and what does it mean for other companies' trials? We know that AstraZeneca ultimately is to do the same thing the other drug makers hope to do, which is encourage the body to produce antibodies to prevent COVID-19. But they have different delivery systems, into the body, the way they're asking cells to do that. So what does the fact that AstraZeneca has paused mean for the other companies' trials?
Just remember that there are different vaccines using different technologies, right? So not all the vaccines are going to have sort of the same side effect profile. And that's one of the reasons why these clinical trials are important, because we will sort of get a sense of what the side effects are for each individual vaccine. So what this means for the other drug makers, I think it's just a reminder that, safety is just as important as the efficacy of these vaccines, particularly when you consider that potentially they're going to be given to millions and millions of people. And it's the reason why the drug makers are running these really large clinical trials, right? We're talking about tens of thousands of participants. Because when you do clinical trials of that size, that's when you are better able to suss out the safety of these vaccines. If there is some very rare side effect that occurs, it's very difficult to find that potentially if you only have, let's say, a dozen or maybe even 100 participants. But when you have tens of thousands of people, that's where you are better able to identify potential risk.
Adam Feuerstein, senior writer at STAT, the Health and Medicine publication. Adam, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Robin.
The photos out of the San Francisco Bay Area this morning are unbelievable. The sky bright orange as many states in the West are literally on fire. In Washington state, officials say more than 300,000 acres have burned since Monday. Governor Jay Inslee called it an unprecedented and heartbreaking event.
We know that we've been well prepared for fires, but these conditions were unprecedented. They led to explosive growth of these fires as a result of the hot and windy and very, very low humidity conditions that were so extraordinary yesterday in the state of Washington.
Fires are also raging in Oregon and California, pumping thick smoke and ash into the air, causing poor and in some areas hazardous air quality. Let's bring in Bonnie Holmes-Jen, Chief of the Health and Exposure Assessment Branch in the Research Division of the California Air Resources Board. Bonnie, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Well, how dangerous is the smoke and the ash that's in the air to the respiratory system, especially when it's so dense?
Yeah, smoke particles, the soot and ash and the dust are very dangerous. They can build up in our bodies and they can cause a number of immediate health problems, ranging from itching, burning eyes and scratchy throat and shortness of breath, but also can cause long-term problems and can particularly cause problems for anyone who has asthma or other lung or cardiac illnesses. Anybody with existing lung or heart conditions is particularly vulnerable to smoke.
So is there anything that can be done, though, other than just staying inside and closing all the windows? Is that even possible?
Well, we do recommend that if you can smell smoke and if you look on the smoke map and see that your area is affected, it probably is best to stay indoors and to use your air conditioning and to make sure that you have a clean air space. It is important to protect your lungs. Lungs are very sensitive. Lungs are not meant to breathe in these amounts of hazardous particles. So it is important to protect yourself and stay indoors. And again, make sure you have a clean air environment. Use a high efficiency particulate filter in your air conditioning system if you can.
And for those of us who are not in the West right now, give us the sense, is it changing by the hour? Do people have to keep track all the time of what's happening with the air quality, or is it typically, it's really bad for a couple of days and then maybe it gets better?
I would recommend that people become very familiar with sites like airnow.gov that provides the latest monitoring information. People can look up the air quality by zip code, and I do think it's important to check it several times throughout the day because the air quality conditions do change depending on the smoke from the fire.
Yesterday, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, said the state's 7-day positivity rate of coronavirus cases has dropped, as is the hospitalization rate. Could the air pollution as a result of these wildfires have any effect in the context of COVID-19?
Well, we know from research that's been conducted that people that live in areas where there's long-term exposure to elevated levels of air pollution are at greater risk for hospitalizations or deaths from COVID-19. So we do know this from research. Basically, smoke pollution is an assault on the lungs, and anybody who has a compromised lungs or heart because of existing conditions is at higher risk. So we do encourage people to take protective measures, particularly if they are especially vulnerable or sensitive to pollution or have any existing respiratory infections.
Obviously, fires happen every year in parts of the West. How does this compare, though, in terms of the air quality to previous years that you've been around?
The air quality and fires have been particularly dangerous this year. We've had areas across the state experiencing poor air quality, ranging from unhealthy for sensitive groups to unhealthy to even hazardous conditions. We've had more than a quarter of the state that's been experiencing fires and bad air quality. So, it is a particularly bad year for air quality, and people need to be particularly concerned and take protective measures to protect their lungs.
Do you expect the bad air to spread to the east as the winds carry it across state lines?
Yes, the smoke can be carried across state lines to neighboring states. Our fires in California are affecting surrounding states, and the smoke can have quite a wide reach. It can travel thousands of miles. People do need to be aware of that, and that's why it's really important to check the latest airnow.gov maps and see where the smoke is affecting areas.
That is Bonnie Holmes-Jen, who is the chief of the Health and Exposure Assessment Branch in the Research Division of the California Social Security. Thanks for joining us.
You're so welcome.
And you're listening to Here and Now.
Much of Generation Z will vote for the first time in November, and they're not afraid to tell you where they stand.
When the Democratic Party came around, I remember unregistering from the Democratic Party that day.
We have 3 Gen Z voters in Los Angeles about the issues that matter most to them this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News. Today at 4 on WHY Live.
I'm Jack Lepiarz. A new report accuses the president of downplaying the dangers of the coronavirus in its earliest days while privately admitting its deadliness, according to the Washington Post, citing excerpts from journalist Bob Woodward's new book. Woodward says the president told him the virus was more deadly than a strenuous flu, even as he said the opposite publicly. White House press secretary says the president has never lied to the American public. A new UN report says the world could surpass a temperature limit set by world leaders 5 years ago in the next decade. The report says the world has a 1 in 4 chance of recording a year 2.7 degrees warmer than pre-industrial times over the next 10 years. Tropical storm Renee is reformed in the central Atlantic.